so we've seen the amazing contrast of the Ponevezher Rav. Ultimate Talmud Chacham, together with that, giving it all up, Mesiras Nefesh, to build the yeshiva. Keen historical sense, going to Shar Titus, but believing in the next generation. Elite yeshiva for top Bachram, but working people need their yeshiva also. And that was the yeshiva which he invested in so deeply. And another, maybe even the most interesting contrast we have and see in him is on the one hand, being totally out of the box, running against the grain, not caring what everybody thought, but yet subjugating himself to Rebbeim. And I want to focus a few sessions on the different sides of this colorful Torah personality. This is something you won't read in a lot of books, and I don't know the full history myself, but it did happen sometimes, unbelievably, that there were rebellions in the Mussar yeshivas. In a broad stroke, that Mussar was a movement pushed by Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and his Talmidim, pushed by the Altus Slobodka, of course, from the Talmidim, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and the Talmidim, Rabbi Yisrael, students and students and students. And there were those who didn't really appreciate the need for Mussar. Why are we taking time out from our regular schedule, from learning, from Gemara? It wasn't worthwhile. And this was a battle, this was a fight which went on in yeshivas. And sometimes it even happened that not only were there different yeshivas in this regard, but there was a rebellion from the students. The Altus Slobodka, at least twice, left the yeshiva because of a rebellion from inside. It's hard to imagine. And that also happened in Telz. Now, I don't know to what extent, but it's known that the Ponevezher Rav, as a young, outstanding Bachar, did have some involvement in that machlokas and had some leadership role. Perhaps he was even giving shir to those who had left the yeshiva or something like that. So he was a leader. He was not scared to go against the grain. And we see that going on in his whole life. And I think this is just my analysis, but part of his ability to build against all those who said he was crazy and all those who said he was just a man of visions and dreams and what's the reality here. Maybe he lost it during the war, like we said. It was that inner drive not to care what others said and to not look over his shoulder and do what's right. And perhaps we can say he tempered that koach in him, the rebelliousness in him from a young age, to put that as a rebellion against the passivity and the rebellion of not saying no and not being able to accomplish things and to look past every horizon and realize all that could be done. And we often want to live in like a passive place, but sometimes we'll say we're not movers, we're shakers, we don't make machlokas, and we don't do anything. Of course, no one should, God forbid, make machlokas. But sometimes it comes from a deep lack in us that we're just passive and just leave things as they are. We don't want to disrupt anything in ourselves and our societies to make things better where they really need to be. And that's a balance which one needs. Now, besides that, it's so interesting that same person who went against the whole world, and think about people who have revolutionary tendencies, if you will, the last thing in the world you can imagine them having is rebellion, that they're nichna to, that they're subservient to, that they put on a pedestal. A lot of times it's the opposite, either because of their ego or because of their personalities, or just so much doesn't fit. But the Ponevezher Rav, being the same person who once was involved in the yeshiva rebellion and his whole life was going against the grain, totally subjected himself to rebellion. Let's start with one of them, the Chavetz Chaim. How did it start? Such a beautiful story. How did the young Ponevezher Rav become a Talmud? And he would consider himself a Talmud of Chavetz Chaim his whole life. Here's the story. As many did, he went to visit the Chavetz Chaim, and he was sitting in his anteroom, and he started to hear where he received guests, and he wasn't yet with the Chavetz Chaim, and he heard terrible cries coming out, heart-wrenching sobs, screams, and he was sitting and he didn't know what was going on. But what really got him was he saw the Rebbetzin, the Chavetz Chaim's wife, was walking around like nothing happened, like it was an everyday event, totally calm. And the screams got louder and louder and finally reached this crescendo, and he couldn't stop himself anymore. And the young Ponevezher Rav, who wasn't even the Ponevezher Rav yet, turned to his Rebbetzin and said, "What's going on? What is going on?" So she said to him, "There's a Maksha Lele, there's a woman who's having problems giving birth, and my husband, the Chavetz Chaim, is davening for her and crying for her." And the Ponevezher Rav perceived right away that this was just normal daily fare. It wasn't the Chavetz Chaim reached a high level on Kol Nidre or on Shavuos or Purim. This was the daily life, because he saw how regular it was for his wife and how understood it was by the Chavetz Chaim's wife. This is what goes on. There's a little bit of an insight who the Chavetz Chaim was. And the Ponevezher said at that moment, if this is who he is, I'm not going to leave here. I'm going to become a Talmud of his. And that's what he became. And in fact, listen to this. The Ponevezher one time said over this story, and someone said to him, "When did this story happen?" And he told them exactly when it was. And I don't have the date. It happened in Tafresh Samach Zayin. He said, "Did this happen in Tafresh Samach Zayin?" And the Rav said, "Yes, it did." He says, "I was that kid. I was the kid." So, and we'll finish with this. The Ponevezher Rav said that Mipilei HaChavetz Chaim, from the wondrousness of the Chavetz Chaim, you often found when he would say over a story or something that someone would be there, or there was some connection to someone in the audience that had something to do with the stories of the Chavetz Chaim he told over. So that was this new pan of the shleimut, of the completion of the Ponevezher Rav. On the one hand, ready to go against the whole grain. On the other hand, ready to totally subject himself to someone who he saw as greater than himself.